Hey, welcome back to the Liberty Room. I'm Mike,
I'm Mike.
and let's dive into this thing.
That was much better.
Okay, thank you.
I like it that way.
News of the day, man. What's been happening? It's been a couple of weeks since we last got together and talked, and some big things have been happening.
We got them stimmies, baby.
Stimmy checks, stimmies.
Yeah, what are you going to do with yours?
I don't get them.
That's a big problem to have.
If I
folks.
did, though, I'd new tats.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe some dreads.
I could see you in dreads.
I think I'd look good.
Dude, you should wear it on the show.
I look like one of them teenage girls that just got back from Cancun with
Although
a bunch of cornrows.
People might accuse you of cultural appropriation. So
Oh man, everybody accused me of everything.
we don't want that. A little gin for you today,
Little
big guy.
gin, little Flower City here, New York. It should be from Texas. It's so delicious, but it's fantastic. I don't know if you've had that yet. It's
No,
incredible.
I'm going with the brown today. A little Kentucky straight bourbon.
I had a few too many of those last night.
Yeah, you had a nice little shindig at your place.
It was fun. It was fun.
It was your wife's 25th birthday?
Yeah, for the 50th time. You can edit that out, right? Please. Okay.
The engineer says he's not editing that out, so hopefully 80 won't watch this.
So, big news. As everybody knows by now, our beloved Congress passed a $1.9 trillion omnibus bill that had all kinds of spending, continuing resolutions, some COVID stimmy money thrown in there.
Little crumbs for us people, as they call it.
Yeah.
For us hobbits.
Yeah.
Yeah. The president signed it. I mean, if you're on our side of the table, you like a little bit of money in your pocket, but you almost feel a little on the hypocritical side to say, on the one hand, we don't like government spending money that it doesn't have. Excuse me. We don't like deficits. We don't like debt.
Right.
But yet, if you get the money in your bank account, I fall into the category of people that got a little bit of it. What are you gonna do? Reject it?
No. Of course not.
Are you a fool to say no? I won't take money. I don't. And so that's a big thing, I think, with a lot of people is, if you look over history of when it comes to money and how people handle it, it almost makes you do things that you're opposed to. In a way, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%.
It's like I can't. I'm sitting here and talk about it on the one hand, but then on the other hand, yeah, I didn't send my money back either time they sent it to me.
No, and I don't feel hypocritical about it at all, right? I mean, it's our tax dollars.
Isn't it
they
your
steal
money?
from
Yeah,
us. It's our money.
And so that's the way I kind of justify, or however you want to define it. That's kind of the way I look at it. Is
the problem is it's not just our money though, right?
It might be our great.
How much of that is borrowed? How much of that is
all of it
is created out of thin air, right?
Will our grandchildren, great grandchildren? That's a big question for me. I'm always curious about, because that's one of the things that the fiscal conservatives, so-called, say is, well, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren are going to inherit this debt, and it seems like you're going to kick this can down the road indefinitely. Is when does the bill come due? And that's something I'm always curious of, and I'm not really sure there's any historical or data that kind of demonstrates when that bill actually comes due, right?
In the modern era that we're in, that's obviously we're pretty fiscally conservative guys, right? And I'm more of a believer in a gold standard and
Sure.
Instead of the fiat currency we have now, but I think we're in uncharted territories, right? We've seen smaller countries, like we've seen what's happened in Zimbabwe, where they have $100 trillion bills, right? We've seen Cuba,
Brazil,
Venezuela, Brazil, and things like that. But when we're talking about first world, industrialized nations like Western Europe, the United States, Canada, etc., we're all doing the same thing, right? Every single one of us is doing the exact same thing, and so. I think there's no precedent. I think there's no, as long as we agree to keep trading with each other.
Right.
It can probably go on forever.
I'm always curious if the bill is going to come due in our lifetime. You know, we're in our middle 40s, you know, early 40s. How long are we going to live? Who knows? But I'm kind of, that's something I think about every once in a while.
Yeah.
When I hear people talk about the when is the bill going to come due part of it, I kind of always wonder. There's this guy, Peter Schiff, that I follow pretty regular that probably a lot of our listeners are aware of. He talks about the reckoning constantly. You know, he's kind of like the Chicken Little, where eventually the sky is going to fall, and what that's going to mean, and should it be another question, which I think we'll get into in the middle part of our show today, is should we go ahead and have this reckoning by doing more what you think, which is the gold standard or the move away from a fiat currency, and go ahead and have that hard period of time, which I've read a lot of different things, whether it'll last 2 years, it could last a decade.
Yeah.
Right. And we could be back where, you know, our great grandparents were in the 1920s and 30s, where they were in this just worldwide depression where, you know, there's no jobs, there's no, you know, everything that went along with the Great Depression. Or should we just keep kicking that can down the road and let that reckoning come more organically? Right.
Yeah, no, it's a good philosophical question to ask, right? And I think I subscribe more to the idea of we know it's coming. It has to, right?
Yeah, I mean,
we don't know what it's going to look like.
A broken clock is right twice, right?
We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know what the severity is going to be, but we know that day is coming. I mean, look, over the since basically a year ago, right, when COVID really came about, we have issued $6.3 trillion worth of COVID-related spending, right? Almost all of it funded by debt.
100%.
Not through tax
revenues.
revenues.
No way.
Because the tax revenues are keeping the government running, which we're already borrowing to do that, right? So then you add this extra $6 trillion on top of it, and we're not even getting into what the Fed has been pumping into banks and whatnot through quantitative easing. So there's untold trillions of dollars that exist on paper there that we really can't even account for at the CBO. So
we've gone way past the balance of revenue versus expenditures to the point where it's gone from in the hundreds of billions, 800 billion, 700 billion deficit, to we're now in multi-trillion-dollar deficits. And, you know, our percentage of GDP in relation to the debt and deficit, they're at levels of which, if you read any economist that's worth their salt, and it doesn't really matter what side of the spectrum they're on, none of them really think it's a good thing. Some of them will temper their responses by saying, well, this is necessary, and then the others are the, you know, more what you would consider conservative, so-called. They say it's a horrible thing, right? And so that's something that I think a lot of our people that are going to watch this show, I think they'd be interested to know exactly what implications it has. And I think as we get into the second part of the show, it's just us giving our opinions. Yeah. I mean, we're using, you know, you've been, 20 years or so, you've been kind of really into it. So same for me. Yeah. You know, we're using that period of time of everything we've read and gathered. We're not sitting at our computers week in and week out and just doing hours and hours of research, right? Right. So we're, you know, moving to the heart of the show, and
I mean, we'll dig into that, and you know, I think what it kind of boils down to is, you know, what is the printing of money? What does that mean? Because that's what we're doing right now, and increase the monetary supply. And how does that affect us as a whole? So
all right. So when we're talking about printing money, right, we're not talking about the Federal Reserve doesn't print the money. It's the Treasury Department that prints the money, right? So you know, this is a subject I know you'd love. It's really near and dear to your heart. And it's a subject that I kind of have a more of a intellectual, more of a kind of historical kind of approach to. But I know it's something that's really important to you because of your your background with your dad and your grandfather and all the subjects that you really enjoy. So talk a little bit about it, Mike. I mean, tell the folks at home.
who prints the money?
Yeah, and what does it
Where
mean?
The money come
what does
from?
it mean to print money?
Yeah.
What is money supply? What is the? Go ahead, Mike. Talk about it.
Yeah. So I think first rattle out of the box. We're not talking about. I mean, we could talk about the actual printing of money by the mint, but no, we're talking about the virtual printing of money. How does money get into circulation? And this, back before Nixon got us completely off the gold standard, the bottom line was there was a Fort Knox and other gold reserves in the country held gold, and we could only have as much money in circulation, or the value of that money was tied to how much gold there was. And over the years, that was slowly chipped away to the point where we're at now.
So at a certain point, you could trade a piece of paper for a physical piece of gold, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And so I think that's what a lot of people don't quite understand, is that at a certain point, maybe in the 19th century, early 20th century, before the Gold Confiscation Act and all those things that Roosevelt did, is you could take a dollar, right, and get an ounce of gold. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, do you know enough about the 1970s to know how many dollars you could trade for an ounce of gold?
No.
That's
no.
it. I'd be curious to know what that was. What was it, 72 that he did that? Somewhere in there?
So close, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it'd be kind of interesting to know.
And even then, though, prior to that, we were already straying off the gold standard, right? So we go back to FDR, in the New Deal era, after the Great Depression, we were already moving into a credit-based, fiat currency. And when we talk about fiat, what that means is the money isn't backed by any intrinsic commodity like gold or silver or something like that.
It's backed off of debt. Essentially.
Yeah, 100%. The full faith and credit.
Right. The government goes to the Federal Reserve and says, we want to borrow X number of dollars. Federal Reserve says, okay, they give us the loan. You're going to pay interest on that loan. So. Yeah,
and that's just it, right? So that's how money is printed. That's how money enters in the marketplace. The Treasury, the Fed says we need to put $1 trillion into the economy. And the Treasury says, okay, we'll sell you $1 trillion worth of Treasury bills. And the Fed goes, great, we don't actually have the money, so we're just going to write you an IOU.
And you're going to pay us back at an interest rate.
At some point, at a very low interest rate, usually.
Right. And so how does that bleed down to the people? People buy Treasury bonds?
They can, foreign countries can buy them.
Right.
The people can buy them. But here's the biggest problem is that the first person that gets a crack at that new dollar that's entered the marketplace, it hasn't funneled its way down through the economy yet, right? It hasn't been traded for goods and services. So when that $1 trillion hits the marketplace, the people that get their first hands on it, they get to use it at the value that it is.
Sure, the institutional investors, right?
But by the time it makes its way to you, it's been
watered down,
yeah.
Exactly. For lack of a better way to put it, right?
And that's why guys like Ludwig von Mises, they always call it the hidden tax. It's almost shameful. I believe they say since 1776, since
85.
Yeah, I mean, since we created coining our own money, the dollar has lost like 99.2%.
Right.
Of its
and
value.
Originally all the states, they were doing paper money that they were printing themselves.
Yeah. Right.
So you had the continental dollar that became virtually worthless at a certain point. So I've always found that I was when I was younger, I was a big Milton Friedman guy, and his research that he did on the supply of money, basically saying that the old myth, right, that greed by banking, right, and Wall Street is what caused the Great Depression. Right. It does have, there's certain truths to that, where there was a lot of speculation, there was a lot of the naked short selling, some of the things that we're actually seeing now with these, large hedge funds. And the Federal Reserve decided they were going to shrink the money supply as a way to curb this excesses of the 20s. And so they shrunk the money supply by, I believe, like 1/3, right? And so in Friedman's research, he basically pinned that on the Great Depression, which is a bad monetary policy, right? And so now what we see is the complete opposite, where they're influxing many more times.
Right.
They're increasing the money supply, which in turn, as you were just talking about, it actually decreases the purchasing power of those dollars.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in that first segment, we talked about, over the past year, $6.3 trillion in spending.
Yeah, how much money does that represent?
Well, I mean,
over the last, say, I know people go back to 200 years or whatever, but let's just talk about Federal Reserve System was what, 1914, early 1900s. So let's kind of talk about it from that standpoint. Do you know what the percentage of money that's been printed in the last 100 years in relation to what's happened in just the last 18 months?
I mean,
30%, 28%, I think is somewhere in that number.
It's before this last 1.9. The federal government had already spent more money than World War I and World War II's combined.
That's crazy.
Combined,
yeah,
right? In less than like an 8-9 month period of time.
And what have we got from
it? What are we at? Like 29 trillion debt or something like that right now? I mean, what is that? I mean, a third of that debt, a quarter to a third of that debt has been added in 1 year.
And I think the whole global economy is like what, 70 trillion.
Oh, it's
some number of that, and then the U.S. economy is 50, 60 so trillion.
Yeah,
and so our percentage of our the GDP in relation to how much debt we have, it's at levels where I remember 10, 12 years ago, people saying, oh, wow, we're at 20%, we're at 30% of our GDP. This is untenable. The world's going to end. Yeah. But that's the thing that I find interesting is that the world hasn't ended, right? What is going on with, the terminology that I hear a lot is the zombie banks, which we heard a lot about in 2008, 2009 when the financial system was in the collapsing from the housing market and such. And so I guess that's what people maybe don't really think about a lot, and maybe today's show will kind of get them to start looking at that a little bit, is are we in that Walking Dead zombie state where we just don't realize how bad it is, because when you go to turn on the water faucet, except for 2 weeks ago in our area, water comes out, you flip on the lights come out, everything that you're able to do happens still, right? Obviously, what is it over the last, what was gas here in Texas 9 months ago? $1.60, $1.50 on the low end somewhere. Right. I think $1.39 in some cases.
Right.
What is it now? It's $2.50.
Right.
So do people really? We're really resilient. That's the one thing about American culture, is that we're really resilient people, right? We can take whatever the government dishes out, I think, for the most part. We say, oh, shoot, man, it costs more to buy bread. It costs more to buy, hamburgers is a good example I know you were talking about earlier. It costs more to buy a lot of things, but we're willing to accept that. And I think that's a lot of part of the problem, is that we'll take these trade-offs. We'll take this $1,400, $2,000, what was the first one, $1,200?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
So we're willing to take $3,200 basically in exchange for what? What is it? What, to me, like, I know you're more, like I said, this is really your wheelhouse. So talk about what you think are the worst. What's the worst thing that can come from this, really?
Well, I mean, it's just the debt in and of itself, right? Mm-hmm. That's the big fear, is when do you pay the piper, right? And
is there a piper? That's another devil's advocate point, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's us. That's what it boils down to. It's us, the people. We're the piper,
right?
Right. At some point, we're gonna say, you can't keep raping us of all this money, right? You can't keep doing that.
Do you think people really will?
Well, and that's why smaller countries, like we were talking about earlier, Venezuela, when Cuba really went down, we're starting to see it in places like Portugal and Greece, where they've been having some difficulty and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Our standard of living, our quality of life here in the United States and Germany, England is so high, right?
Yeah. Our poorest people are rich. We
In,
talked
in
about that in
many
the last
other
episode,
countries, correct, right? And so when we talk about poverty in the United States, or cost
we have
of
an
living,
obesity problem.
yeah.
I know
Right.
there are hungry people. There are people that are hungry and starving.
Right.
But in general, when you look at real data that's collected by the government agencies, we have obesity problems, we have diabetes, we have all these diseases and issues that are associated with overconsumption.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that when it comes down to it, I guess the real question is should we go to the extreme where we have this reckoning, right? Or the other extreme, which is where we just keep doing what we're doing. But how can we find something in the middle? Like, what do you think the middle ground is, honestly?
Yeah, I mean,
do you think it's a mix of fiat and gold? Do you think it's possible to have both?
No.
No.
I practically, right?
Right.
And getting back to a gold standard, I think at this point, I think you can do it. It's not a question of if we can do it. It's do we have the fortitude to do it, right? And I just don't think we do, right? The standard of living for Americans is so great, even for the poorest Americans, that they can't. It's impossible to comprehend what that's going to look like. Now, I will say, a reckoning is coming. I would like to plan for it. I would like to set wheels in motion to
not just for yourself. You're talking about
the country, right?
For everybody,
the world, honestly, so that we can land into that softly, right, and try to lessen the impact. But the damn shame of it is, anytime the goddamn government gets involved, instead of lessening the impact, they hyperinflate the impact, right?
Make it worse.
Exactly. So we have this situation with COVID where people are out of work, and we talked about this in the last episode. But we're paying people not to go back to work. We're giving people money at the expense of adding trillions. That $1,400 stimulus check is costing you $5,500 in debt.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Now it's up in the ether. It's this arbitrary thing. You don't feel it, right? It's a delayed effect. But you were talking about hamburgers a minute ago, and and we can equate.
Which I know you like.
Love them. Love the damn thing. Just freaking delicious. And I don't care where they're from, man. People are like, I don't eat a McDonald's or whatever. Man, I'll take a quarter pounder. I'll take a double cheeseburger.
I'm a fan of the old school hamburger. It's just got ketchup and mustard and pickles. Just a little hamburger. You squish it together.
There you go.
I love those. I'd take one of those. Do you have any?
Well, I mean, how much does those cost? Like 27 cents still?
$1.07.
Yeah, it's like the one thing that doesn't apply to what we're talking about.
I know, right? $1.07 for that, man. I'm all in. I keep 7 cents in my little car change.
But I told my kids, we talk about gold. Spot price of gold, we just looked it up. It's just over $1,700 an ounce, right? And I was talking to my brother earlier this morning. He stopped by the house, and he was like, "Man, have you seen the price of gold?" And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I can't believe it's gone up in value. And I'm like, wait. The value of gold doesn't change. Gold is worth what gold is worth.
Right.
It's the dollar that's changing. And when I talk to my kids about that, I use hamburgers. And I'm like, isn't it funny when they talk to their grandparents and they're like, oh, back in my day in high school,
25 cents
or
a nickel or whatever.
Nickel.
Yeah.
And that hamburger is made out of a bun, a patty, lettuce, tomatoes, pickles, onions, condiments, exactly what the ingredients of a hamburger have not changed.
Right.
You could even go a little bit further and say we have more access to ingredients through GMOs and whatnot.
Absolutely. And transportation, et cetera.
Things are a lot more efficient. So
it's easier to get a hamburger to the market, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. Right. And there's more outlets that are doing that. Right? The supply is massive compared to what it used to be. Why isn't a hamburger still a nickel or 25 cents?
Yeah, because a nickel is worth zero, right?
Right.
Less than zero, probably.
Right. And so is the value of the hamburger changed? The calorie content is the same.
Right.
That hamburger is worth what a hamburger is worth. And it's only the value of money that's changed, right? And that's why I'm paying $3 or whatever for a subpar fast food burger, or go to a guy's like Five Guys.
Yeah, where it's $9.
It's like $1 billion for a greasy hamburger, right? $1 billion.
Yeah, I find the putting things in terms that people understand, I think, is what is doesn't really happen a lot in these conversations. We talked in previous episodes about the big L, little L libertarians, and a lot of times, like I was saying, you get painted as this heartless, bastard that doesn't want people to have anything. You want people to suffer, basically, so that you can be right.
Right.
So the idea that things could be cheaper if we went to a gold standard. Could you actually use gold to buy a hamburger? Like, how many hamburgers could you buy for an ounce of gold?
Right now, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Five Guys, obviously.
Right.
Or 1,000 Burger Kings. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
I'd take it.
That's how the.
Yeah. So it's really. I think that's something that people should think about more. That you don't. If you don't really take that analytical, point by point method of doing it, you're going to get lost in the equation, right?
It's probably the single biggest thing that I would want people to take away from this conversation is to change the way that we think about money in terms of the money doesn't have the value, right?
Right.
Before there was money, we were on a barter system, right? So if I wanted your eggs that your hen laid, I had to have something that you wanted in equal value. And so maybe you wanted the leather off my cow, right? And the problem is with a barter system where we're restricted by the goods that we have to trade, right? And so then money came about as a method to do that.
Right.
But the principle is the same. That leather sheath or whatever, is worth a dozen eggs. That hasn't
Right.
really changed.
Like Roman
over
soldiers
time.
were paid in salt.
Right.
Originally. So that was the first form of money, essentially, was product, something.
And so, the things that have the value are the commodities, and services, right?
And what
But
goes behind that commodity?
goods
It's
and
labor.
services. Yeah.
It's a business owner like yourself putting a risk out there, investing their own resources.
There's tangible work that's been put into that, right? And so every time something costs more, it's not that the value of the product has gone up. It's that the value of your money has gone down.
Yeah, that's really
It's
interesting.
just the coupon in which we exchange, right? And if people can start thinking in that manner, for instance, I saw something on Facebook the other day. It was a meme about greedy corporations and how candy bars have shrunk over time so that the greedy corporations can make more money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's kind of bullshit, right? Because the candy bar's $1.
Yeah.
Right? The costs are continuing to go up for everybody. What are my options? Raise the price to maintain my margin and continue my profit.
So you'll sell fewer candy bars.
Yeah. Or shrink the size, keep the price point the same. We know they fly off the shelves at $1, right? But they're not making any more profits off of it. It's just the value of an ounce of candy.
It's interesting.
Continues to go up. Anyway, I don't want to go.
No, and so I was thinking about let me take a devil's advocate approach here, which is let's call it the left side of the equation, right? Which says, well, Mike, we got a deficit. We have $3.5 trillion in tax revenues, and we've got expenditures of $5.5 trillion. Let's make up that $2 trillion by taxing people more. Let's just tax the rich, whoever these magical people are. Let's just tax people more. Let's tax anyone more. We'll do value-added taxes. We'll do consumption taxes. Let's just tax people more. And as a byproduct of that, we'll bring in more revenue.
Yeah.
So, if you look at actual data, it doesn't bear that fact out. So let's take that approach where I'm saying, nah, man, let's just tax people more.
Okay.
Like, what would your response to that be? Basically, what I just said, which is taxes go lower, the government gets more money because people's incentives change. So talk about that.
No, absolutely. So that's a great question, Mike. And
thank you.
I don't tell you that enough. I suppose
I need that.
No, it really is, because I think at the surface level, what you're asking and what you're saying makes sense to a lot of individuals. And my quick response is, that's what we've been doing.
Yeah.
Right. we've been since FDR, since really the New Deal, since after the Great Depression, we've been taxing the rich in some manner. Maybe it's, the politicians, maybe it's not enough, maybe it's too much. At the end of the day, the top 20% of earners in this country are paying more than 80% of the tax revenue, right? The top 10% are paying, I think it's close to 60%. The top 1%, is paying an inordinate amount, 30% or whatever of all taxes collected. So this idea that if we just tax the rich a little bit more,
and the definition of who is the rich is always changing,
right?
Is somebody that makes $400,000 a year, are they rich? They have cool houses, they have good crap, they have all the cool shit that we want, but are they really rich?
Well, and we also
what is the top 1% of incomes, like 460,000 a year?
Yeah, something like that. So there's two ways to look at it, right? There's, I think what most of us think of is income, right? But really income's not the story. It's assets, right? It's net worth. And I think in order to be in the top 1%, you need to be earning over, $450,000 a year in income. But it's $11 million of net worth, right? Which is,
difficult
beyond,
it's difficult to attain that.
You have to have assets. You have to have things like that. A lot of them are business owners, or they have real estate assets and things like that. So I know that you are pretty well read in this particular. You maybe have a few facts and figures. So I'm going to throw it back to you and talk about what has transpired over the last century or so.
Sure.
And
one of the things I found interesting, I read one time, was like, I think it was 1921, 1922 is when they first started actually taking, started collecting data on incomes, right? And at that point, I mean, there were fewer than 20, 30 people, individuals in the whole country that claimed $1 million or more of income.
Right.
Okay. And whenever Calvin Coolidge came in, he was the first president he took the tax rates and just lowered them across the board for everyone, not just the rich, the low income. He lowered them across the board. Well, the very next year, the number of people claiming $1 million or more in income like doubled or tripled.
Correct.
Right? And so does that mean that all of a sudden there were magically triple the amount of people that earned $1 million a year in income? No. That's not what happened.
Right.
It was the fact that when the tax rates lowered, these rich people at the time, these people earning $1 million or more in income, they had a different incentive. Like they could actually put their money out there to risk being taxed on it because they were going to see some kind of gain. And I think that, you take kind of what I understand is that since the creation of the IRS, where people pay taxes to the federal government, 5 presidents in 100 years have taken all the rates across the board and lowered them. You got Coolidge, Kennedy, George W. Bush, Trump, and I don't know who the third one was. Anyway, whatever. So you've had 4 or 5 times over this whole period of time where all tax rates have been lowered. Well, if you look at the the rates. So you take the look at the next 4 years of revenue. Well, the actual revenue that the government received was higher.
Correct.
Okay, and this fuels that supply side economics theory, which I don't like. We talked about in the previous episode, that trickle down nonsense. But in reality, it should make the left, the liberal, the progressives, it should make them happier. Right?
Yeah.
They have more money to give away, which
spend on social programs.
I'm not against. That's the other. We talked about this heartlessness of the so-called libertarian people. The lift yourself up by your bootstraps, do it yourself. I'm not against helping. That's part of living. In my mind, that is kind of a trade-off that we should make. Where if we're in a wealthy society, we should definitely help people that just can't help themselves.
Right.
Okay. Does giving away this stimulus checks, does that really help people that can't help themselves? Maybe. I think you could argue both sides of that real easily. But if you're looking at it from a money historical standpoint, it actually it actually brings in more money
Right.
to take that burden off of people, the rich, the high income earners, and I don't necessarily prescribe to that philosophy that if you just raise taxes on people, it's going to generate more money, because the data kind of indicates that it doesn't really work. And people will go and say, well, Bill Clinton raised tax rates, right? He erased Reagan. He was the fifth president. I'm sorry, I couldn't remember Reagan earlier. He lowered all the tax rates, right? So Clinton erased the Reaganomics, the lower tax rates things, but Clinton lowered the capital gains tax.
Correct.
Right? Well, who the hell does that help? That doesn't help me, the normal hobbit.
Right.
That doesn't, I don't go and sell a $1 million piece of property and bring in a 30% return on that, right? And so if I'm that really, really wealthy person, then it sees a high capital gains tax, I'm not gonna put my money out there for taxation. And it's never been. We talked about this before. I mean, how easy is it for somebody making 50 or 60 grand a year to not expose their income to taxation? Zero.
Right.
You get a paycheck, it's exposed 100%
Correct.
to whatever tax rate you're self-employed.
Baked into it, right?
100%, right? But if you're a billionaire like a Bezos or Elon Musk or one of these, super, super, super wealthy people, the Berkshire Hathaways of the world, the hedge fund managers, you don't have to expose your wealth to taxation.
Right.
You can just take, a dividend income. And I always laugh when I see like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett say, "Oh, well, just tax me more, tax my dividends at a higher rate."
Yeah.
My secretary pays a higher tax rate than I do. Well, of course they do, because you're taking a dividend tax at 12 or 14 or 15%, and you're paying yourself $1 a year.
Well, yeah, Warren Buffett's
They don't need an
secretary-
income.
Yeah, his secretary derives its wage income.
It could be a him.
Either way.
Don't be,
I'm
and
not
they like to be. It's an
non-binary,
executive
gender-specific,
assistant,
Latinx.
executive administrative assistant, not a secretary. Get it right.
Okay.
But really, I mean, this is really what's in your wheelhouse, which is kind of going back to what you were saying before, which is the counter argument of me saying, well, let's just tax people more, right?
Well, yeah. So, and like I said a minute ago, at first blush, it sounds intuitive, right? To tax people more. But the moment you do that, you've completely disincentivized them to be productive.
Sure.
And when we're talking about the wealthy,
or you're incentivizing them to not expose their money.
Not expose, right?
I think that's more the thing, because if you're a type A personality, ultra wealthy, hyper wealthy person, there's not much that can disincentivize you to be productive.
So,
you can just move it away to where it doesn't actually get exposed to that taxation.
And
I think that's kind of
it begs a unique question, right? Because I think in a perfect world, right, where you could say, well, we just tax the wealthy more. That will bring in more revenue. I mean, that will bring in a serious amount of revenue, right?
With the caveat is if they allow their money to be taxed.
Correct. And so the pragmatic problem, the realistic issue is that's not how government works.
Or that's not how real life works.
It's not, right? And so we can say, oh, well, we'll just raise their taxable income on their wage income to 80%, right?
Sure.
Just throw it out there. Well, the government still allows, it still has all these loopholes.
If you got $500 million in the bank, why do you need an income?
Right.
It's actually against your self-interest to actually draw an income from your company.
If I sell some of that real estate or something, that's not wage income.
Right.
That's not subject to the same type of taxation. So it is a bit of a fool's errand to say that, because government is not in the business of harming the elite.
Sure.
Right?
Because
government's not in the business.
Of it.
They're part of it, right?
Yeah.
So they're not going to harm themselves. So all the talk of, let's eat the rich, let's tax the wealthy, first of all, ain't going to happen.
Right.
And it's just not going to happen.
Tim Cook's a great example of that. This is a guy that is, when it comes to his stocks, his holdings of Apple, I guess, billionaire, I'm pretty sure you could say. But he's one of the lowest paid CEOs in relation to the market cap of his company. Like if you take a look at what he actually gets paid from Apple, it's definitely not in the range of a CEO of Halliburton or Coca-Cola or one of these mega
Right.
corps, he didn't really take that much income. Same with Warren
Bezos.
Buffett. Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
really take a lot of income because they can talk out of both sides of their mouth really easily.
Yeah.
And I think that is a lot of what fuels this narrative of what you're talking about, eat the rich, when in reality, they're too big of a like we couldn't eat the rich if we tried.
Well, and really also, when we talk about those super elites, right? The Elon Musks, the Cooks, the Bezos, the Buffetts, there's not many of them.
No,
There really is not very many of them. There's
the Waltons, those type.
yeah,
People,
and so we could tax them 100%, take all their assets, and what does that do? Fund the government for 6 months?
6 days.
Yeah, I mean it's
actually
such a
less.
paltry amount overall in reality. So and taxing them more, what does that do for the average ordinary American? It's really not making.
No,
their life
I think
better.
it's more of an emotional argument.
Yeah.
And that's always what really upsets me is that we are, by nature, human beings are emotional beings. And we respond well to demagoguery. We respond well to this us versus them mentality.
for sure.
And I think that is it's dangerous because if you're a middle-aged person, you've lived some life, right? You've got this a little bit of perspective. But if you're young, if you're 18, 19, 20 years old, and you're hearing and seeing all this, it's making your point of view so off. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yeah, programming.
Yeah,
I don't like that word.
It's just
but
giving you this false sense of
correct,
reality.
Correct.
Where there's no, again, I think a common reoccurring theme of what our show is going to be is about nuance, right? And how it's dead. And unfortunately for young folks, young people, they're not getting that nuanced perspective from lived experience. Yeah. And so one of the kind of the mission statement of our show is to kind of we want to bring that to people, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely it's in your once again that's in your wheelhouse of your learning and research is that aspect of it.
So if we going back to the beginning here, we're spending more money than we're taking in.
Right.
We're printing more money to hand out, which is funded by debt.
Sure.
We don't feel that disincentivizing the productive, the job creators, right? Disincentivizing investment and
Right.
those sorts of things is not the path to dig us out.
And we're demonizing those people in the process.
At the same time, right?
Yeah, sure.
Which is all bullshit because at the same time it's handshake, wink, wink.
Yeah.
We're still cronyism.
I heard a
at
guy
play.
say one time, a poor person never gave me a job.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
In theory, you
Yeah.
know, and then that goes to what you're saying.
So then what is the way out, right? I mean, we can't tax ourselves to prosperity.
Good.
Right?
That's one of the best. That's one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah.
Is you can't tax yourself to
So
prosperity.
the only thing I have a couple of points, and maybe we'll kind of break these apart, kind of in the closing moments of the show. But it's a spending problem, right?
Sure.
And that's what we never talk about, right? Or we talk about it, but nobody does anything about it, right? It's obvious we have to cut spending.
Right.
We have to cut spending to some measure, or that cliff is coming faster and faster to us. But that's an arbitrary thing for most people to understand. And how does that impact us on Main Street, right? How does that impact each individual one of us? And I think what I'd like to kind of flesh out is this fallacy that we're all working within this. You've heard politicians talk about your fair share. Well, Bezos has taken more than his fair share.
Who gets to
piece of
define
the
what
pie,
fair share means?
right?
It's
And
someone that's elected.
And that wealth is not it's not a zero-sum game,
Sure.
right? That
I
we can
win, you
expand.
lose. That's
Right.
what zero sum means: is someone wins, someone loses.
Well, and that's just what they're doing at the end of the day, right? That's the media and the politicians are fomenting this anger between the middle class and the lower class against the upper class, right? And it's we got to get after them. We got to get it's almost retribution, right? There's such anger there, and
It's
attacking them-
punitive.
yes,
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah.
The problem with it, though, is who wins damages when we're going after the rich? It's not us.
No, for certain.
The everyday American is not going to see any of those spoils.
No, they're not.
So rather than try to punish producers, harm those that are contributing, I'm glad Amazon exists. I'm glad Apple exists. I'm glad Walmart exists. These organizations make my life better.
Sure.
But
But should they exist at the expense of the small mom and pop retailer?
yeah,
Because they've been hit the hardest in
True.
the last year, which we can talk about. I think that'd be a really good subject, because I would imagine that some of our potential and current viewers and listeners are probably business owners of
Yeah.
small retail
yeah,
operations. Is that should those you look at? This is really interesting. So you look at like Microsoft, you look at all these big tech companies. 20 years ago, they did not lobby the government, but yet you go look at right now, 2 blocks from the White House, 3 blocks from the Congress, Amazon,
They're all right there.
Microsoft,
Yeah.
they all have these offices
Yeah.
where they lobby the government to give them special permissions and special exemptions that hurt the mom and pops. The real, in my mind, those producers are just as important. I love Amazon. I love these big companies because obviously, Walmart, they brought the veneer of the upper class to the lower and middle
Absolutely.
classes, right? Because we talked about this before. How much did you pay for your first plasma TV from Best Buy?
Oh yeah,
Crazy amount of money.
insane amounts, right?
Right. But when that trickled down to Walmart and you could go get one for $400, $500,
Right.
a regular normal earner can justify going and
Right.
purchasing that. So I think that's going to be it's a great kind of segue to maybe what our next topic could be is, how important is it to allow these big giant businesses to continue on and to, kind of cannibalize small businesses.
Yeah.
I think that'd be interesting
Yeah,
to
it would
talk
be.
about.
It would be, yeah, for sure. And tying that into not only that, but now add COVID to that, right?
Right.
And the outside variables of government. What have they done to even further harm this? But I want to kind of tie this up, right? I think the goal today, is really talking about the excess printing of money,
Yeah.
the debt that we're going into, and things like that.
Yeah, we got a little off topic.
How do we work our way out of that? And from where I'm sitting, what I want my government to do.
Yeah, what's the libertarian? That's a good.
Yeah.
I mean, a good way to finish this off is okay, you're the more libertarian part of this exchange, right? What's that? What does that perspective inform you? How does that? Tell the folks at home. Tell the folks at home how the libertarian mindset approaches to finish it off. Approaches that, right?
Yeah, I think it's two things, right? From a monetary standpoint, we have to get back to sound monetary policy, right?
Okay.
Basic things. Don't spend more than you take in. Try to preserve the value of our dollar, right? To preserve our purchasing power. I want not that I'm a big fan of central banking, but since we have a central bank,
Right.
that's what I want them to be doing, right? Not propping up businesses that are too big to fail,
Sure.
right? The other thing I want is the government just get the hell out of the way for a minute, right?
Sure.
Quit imposing so many regulations. Quit using our tax dollars as these effing slush funds to contribute to these pet projects. Wealth is ever expanding, right? If I have an idea and I work hard,
The better
and
mousetrap.
I bring a new value to the consumers.
The better mousetrap theory.
I'm expanding wealth. I'm creating new jobs that didn't exist. Right? I'm giving more people the opportunity to earn money, buy assets, and continue to expand their wealth. And that can easily be achieved by the government just stepping back for just a moment, repeal some of this protectionist regulations that props up major corporations, and allow these mom and pop stores to compete, and allow innovative thinkers, right, to enter into the marketplace. And competition does what?
And so what you're talking about is the roadmap. Yeah. That's, I think, the biggest part of someone who is not necessarily, I'm all for freedom, I'm all for liberty, I'm all for you do what you want to do, I want to do what I want to do. The biggest thing about libertarianism is that it's all a theory. It's all a concept that's very difficult to implement because it's kind of at odds with how things work, right? With what you're talking about, everything you just talked about. And I think that that's something that I'd really love to explore, is going from the theory of it to the actual
practical application,
to the roadmap of it. What is the prescription to get to that point that has a minimal impact on the average person, because no one wants to have another Great Depression just for the sake of having sound money.
So there
because if you look at it, I think there's like 4 countries in the whole world that don't have a central bank.
Right.
Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and North Korea. Does anyone listening want to live in one of those 4 countries right now?
I hope Michael Moore is listening.
Go,
Mr. Venezuela.
Adios, Pepe. But so, I mean, really, think about it from that standpoint. Does anybody want to live in those 4 countries right now?
No, of course not.
More than not, they want to leave those 4 countries. So, how can we? It's a good way to tie it all off for this segment. Is how can we get to not being one of those 4 places? Stay who we are. Keep our value system, keep this idea of helping those that can't help themselves, the old, the invalid, the children, the people that have no mental capacity, through disease or through just no fault of their own, right? Yeah. Like they just can't do it for themselves. I would rather give 100% of my wages to someone like that than give 20% of my wages to the government that's going to waste it.
Yeah, to prop up Bear Stearns or
whoever, right?
Or whatever the case may be.
So, I mean, I think that's something that we're really going to continue to flesh out and talk about, is how that roadmap, how do we get there, man?
So, stay tuned. Keep watching the podcast. I just took a note here. Roadmap to libertarianism. How
he made a note. I saw it.
It's very important when I
the folks at home can't see your notes, but
incredible penmanship. So no, I think it was a good topic to discuss today. Mm-hmm. I know we went down a few rabbit holes, but we'll keep fleshing this thing. That's what it's all about, though, man. It's conversation.
Yeah, I think that if people are expecting a news show where we have these bottled up little segments,
no, that ain't us.
It's not us, and also it's not productive. Like, we're not going to ever get to, we're never going to get to a point to where we can have any kind of real change or real effect on people's lives by breaking it off into these little siloed conversations. Yeah. So I think this is part of it, and we definitely got some feedback from our first show. Mm-hmm. You asked us to look more into the camera.
I don't know if we accomplished that.
I'm looking at the camera right now, and I'm asking you, hey, give us some feedback. Comment. We now have a YouTube page. You can find us at the Liberty Room on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook. Get on there. Give us some comments. Give us some feedback. Tell us what you want to talk about. There's going to be some subjects that you want to hear us talk about that we don't really.
We're just 2 putzes making it up as we go.
Yeah,
we're just,
exactly.
We want to do stuff that's entertaining to you guys. And the other thing that we're going to do is we start having guests. and really getting other people's point of views on this thing. So if you want to be a guest, holler at one of us, man. Let us know. We'd love to have you on. You don't have to be, the president of the world or anything.
No,
we just want to talk to people who
we both have
are
faces.
passionate about this.
We both have faces for radio.
Well, I don't know if that applies to me, but hey, thank you. Was a smoke into the microphone there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We're so glad that we get to do this. So we will see you on the flip side.
Catch you on the flippity flip. Per Michael Scott.
Coming very soon, this podcast will be available on all of your favorite streaming services. As for now, just hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, The Liberty Room. Hope to see you at the next episode.